interesting little stream discussion going on between on the Bad Faith podcast channel between Brianna Joy Gray, Chris Hedges, and Richard Wolf. And quick shout out to my two Uber comrades on Patreon, my partner and Independent Left News. And then so she is talking about right now about kind of this divide on the left between these, she's describing them as these institutional actors who are, don't want to create any type of third party outside of the, Democrat Republican duopoly there, and then starts talking about Hassan Piker and this whole House debate, and then we have Hedges weighing in. So let's take a listen.
Because he is opposed to third parties, because he
this is talking about Hassan, I believe.
Is defensive of the squad.
This is about Hassan.
Supportive of efforts like Force the Vote. That is part of why we're frustrated that he has been able to earn so much money and buy this house, let's say. And that the people who are doing the best in the left ecosystem are the people, not frankly Jimmy Dore, he's an outlier there, I'd say, but are the people who have kind of closed ranks around lefty institutional actors, perhaps for access reasons, perhaps who knows why. It could be sincere sympathies. But that's part of what's motivating, I think, this fracture. It's not all superficial.
Yeah, but what you're describing are boutique activists. You're not describing real activists.
So Hedges is saying that Hassan would be a boutique activist, not a real activist. What do you think about that? I mean, I think that's fairly accurate, right? Hassan seems to be, fall into that paradigm. Support Democrats, support the squad. Don't try to, generate any type of momentum for a third party, because that's, frankly, as Hedges points out, probably the only way that you could actually get the Democratic Party to institute any type of, so-called progressive policies, is if you actually have a third party that would force the Democrats to the table, because they don't really have any incentive to do that now, because they can basically say, well, it's me or the horrible orange man, so you kind of have to vote for me. But if you actually had a viable third party option, you could hold the Democratic Party's feet to the fire a little bit. And so Hedges is just saying people like Hassan Piker are boutique activists, are not really the real deal from his perspective.
Let me describe you real activists.
Sure.
I've taught for 10 years in the New Jersey prison system. I've also taught at Princeton, Columbia, and a few other places. The brightest, most politically astute students I've ever had are inside the prison system. If they get, this is through Rutgers University, it's a great program, they get their BA in the prison, and if they get out and they have a 3.1, they can matriculate to Rutgers. Well, my students matriculated to Rutgers, and they're now unionizing, working to unionize the service workers at Rutgers.
Nice.
That's real activism. That's where our energy has to go. And it's done, these people they're almost all black, but they're not traditional liberals. They're radicals. And they're unionizing people who probably voted for Trump. It doesn't matter. They know where the center of power is. They know what they have to do to organize, and they're doing it. And that's where our hope lies. When I went to seminary, I went to Harvard Divinity School. Poor Rick also went to Harvard. And I lived in Roxbury, and I commuted into Cambridge every day. And that's where I say I learned to hate liberals. All these people sitting around talking about empowering people they never met. I went back on the Green Line. They could go, it's a 20-minute ride to the projects in Roxbury, but they weren't going there. They were flying off to Nicaragua to pick coffee a week with the Sandinistas and coming back and talking about it for the rest of the semester. Those are the kind of activists you're speaking about, boutique activists.
That's how he's comparing Hassan to somebody that would fly down to Nicaragua for a week to hang out with the Sandinistas and then talk about it for the rest of the quarter or semester. That's the type of comparison Hedges is making to Hassan. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Traditionally been and remain utterly irrelevant, not important, and not worth your time your energy even responding to.
But that sounds
go ahead. Let me amplify that in a way and describe to you meetings that happen on an almost daily basis in the European socialist movement.
Okay.
Here's how the meeting goes. You have a bunch of people who are elected by the Socialist Party or the Green Party or the Communist Party or the Left Party, and they have all of those in Europe. And together they're half of a country or more in most cases, right? Those people sit around with the activists, the union leaders, the social movement leaders. In France, for example, it's the Yellow Vests movement. The activists in the language that Chris
that
just
yellow
used.
vest behind him,
and
right?
The activists explain to the people who sit in Parliament, you need us, because when we make noise in the street, you can parade around as the more reasonable version of all of this,
right?
And you can get things done you cannot get done if we're not out here, to use Chris's language, scaring the pants off people of what might be coming. So
turn your phone off, Wolf.
Our adversaries, because you aren't. You're actually our allies, and we are yours. And we want from you this, and this. And you're going to get from us this, and this.
Let's see. I'm going to say capitalism is the virus.
We have something to take. We are not getting exactly what we want, but together we're building a movement. And here's the way we want you to help us build our movement in the streets, because we are, in fact, helping you build your power base. And that means also that you can quit on an issue of principle, because we have a place in a movement
we could go.
for you to do other things, and maybe even run for office again, and maybe in another place, and maybe for a higher. Or, in other words, you need us even to be what you claim to be in favor of. If you build your coalition right, you can work it that way. You don't have to see it as a choice either or. You need each other. The labor movement needs people in there to get laws that might not have been passed or rules softened that might have hurt more. And the people need that social movement, because that's who's going to vote them in, etc. On that basis, all kinds of things can be done. But if you don't try that, then you're left with the excuse, gee, we can't do it because there isn't a movement. But, I remember...
I haven't really been trying it, because a lot of people just no, stay within the Democratic Party. We can get stuff done. Get Biden in there. We can push him left. We see how that's going. Nowhere.
It's Obama telling people who went to visit him in the White House, I can't do the things you're asking. I need a mass movement. Go out there and make a movement, then I can do these things. And the minute we had the Occupy Wall Street movement, Mr. Obama
cracked down on it.
Yeah, the movement he said he wanted to enable him to do all these things. I mean, this relationship can be sour for both sides, or it can be very powerful. That's up to us.
Right. Well, it also seems to be, to a certain degree, up to these elected officials who don't seem to have the attitude that having outside pressure is helpful, and that can make them seem like the reasonable, serious ones in the room. And you see that in part because, and this is saying this is going to get me some grifter accusations, but, it seems in part because there is not a relationship even between the elected left figures and the kind of left media that is probably the best connector between them and the kind of issues that people are agitating for on the ground. So, a couple of weeks ago, there was a big brouhaha because journalist Max Blumenthal has a conversation with Cori Bush on the steps of Congress when she was doing the sleep-in that got the eviction moratorium extended. And they had a reasonable conversation, and then at the end, he asked her about force the vote, at which point two of
somebody stepped in, their handlers.
Staffers interjected and kind of blocked him, and she walked away. And again, the institutional left media covered that as Max Blumenthal being very aggressive and hostile, and why are we still talking about force the vote, and yada, yada, yada. And he's attacking a woman of color and all of that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, well, I would put to Cori Bush, you won't get ambushed. I heard that she didn't want to talk. She wanted to keep the focus on the eviction moratorium. Fair enough. If you don't want to get ambushed at the steps of the Capitol or at Medicare for All marches or what have you about force the vote, sit down and have one good interview with a left media outlet about your decision-making process. Explain to us what's going on. Feed the left infrastructure so that it can grow and be more powerful in the way that the right infrastructure can help all of its candidates when the mainstream media opposes somebody like Trump.
Newsmax, Fox.
And create a solidaristic relationship where you're telling us
One
what the
America,
game plan is
right?
and how we can help and vice versa. But that 100% doesn't exist. And I would argue that half of the left is perfectly fine with that arrangement.
Well, Brianna, look, what Max did is called journalism.
Speaking truth to power, yes,
job
exactly.
And abide by whatever strictures or public relations campaign anybody,
precisely,
even Booker, who I like, has. That's not our job.
Right.
They have lots of public relations people that do that. And so what Max did his job.
Right.
And that's kind of the sad state that we're in. And this is a whole other show. I mean, what's happened to journalism itself? It's just been destroyed in any meaningful way. And it's why real journalists like Taibbi or Greenwald or myself or anyone else have been pushed so far to the margins. None of us are on even MSNBC. We can't get on any of that. You know, power is always the problem, and some forms of power are more benign than others. But in that sense, you know, I buy kind of, along with Chomsky, this kind of anarchist relationship to power. And again, this goes back to Weber. Weber understood this really well. And just to pick up a point, because I meant to say it before when Rick was talking about objective and subjective, the person who wrote the best on this was Rosa Luxemburg. Who understood
Rosa.
there's a big debate among the socialist movement. What happens if people are hungry? Well, let's let them get even hungrier because then it will further the revolution. And Luxemburg, and it's worth going back and reading, wrote, we can't be heartless. We have to address
the
both
needs.
The subjective and objective issues before us, which means that we have to work as hard as we can to provide food as we do to carry out revolution. And I think that's right, because we can't be without pity for suffering. That should be what is driving us. We have to respond to that suffering. And at the same time, we have to understand the systems of power that orchestrate and profit off of that suffering to bring them down.
Well, that brings us back to the point that we started with, which is the skepticism that some folks have, rightly or wrongly, whatever's driving it, jealousy, what have you, of folks on the left who do get rich enough that they are perceived as being out of touch, that they aren't doing the mutual aid, that they don't seem to be fighting for, the argument is they must not be fighting so hard to feed the poor or to help the worst amongst us if they have the disposable income to do X, Y, and Z. And someone might say it about someone who buys a $3 million house, someone might say it about Bernie for having 3 houses, someone might say it about me because of the luxurious, sometimes overpriced candles that I buy for my studio apartment. We're all culpable to some degrees. We're all above the average American income and far above the poverty levels, which are set far
very lower
than they should be. And so I don't know. Like I don't want to be dismissive of that skepticism. I think there's some utility to being challenged to have more of the perspective of the students that you talked about that you taught in prison, who seem to be more focused, perhaps in part because they have a closer relationship to real struggle. And is there something to be said about kind of the class identity politics having value there? Hey, YouTube, don't forget this is a podcast. To get full episodes, including ones that are behind a paywall, go to patreon.com/badfaithpodcast to get more episodes. Please do subscribe to this.
Well, that was pretty interesting. Yeah, and I'm almost thinking about signing up for their Patreon. She does seem like they have quite a few good guests on here. So is it? I thought this was with her and Virgil, Texas. Is it just with Brianna Joy Gray now? It's kind of interesting, but pretty interesting to get kind of Hedges' perspective on this. Just thinking that people like in Hassan's position are just boutique activists, not really the real deal. And then, Brianna's pointing out how the kind of people in Hassan's position aren't really speaking truth to power. The only kind of exception to that is Jimmy Dore, who is ready and willing to call out politicians, whether it be Democrat or Republican, and trying to hold their feet to the fire to actually get them, to do things for the working class to improve their material conditions. Pretty interesting discussion. Let me know your thoughts down below on all of this. Subscribe to the channel, like the video if you like it, dislike it, that's also cool too. Become a patron if you're so inclined. Peace, much love.